We created a comfortable, predictable existence together when we were young, just out of college, and everything was up to us. The kind of life where Friday nights were spent with takeout and a movie and Sunday mornings were spent with pancakes and the newspaper. I loved her, or at least I believed I did. The cracks began when she told me she was pregnant. I'm not a jealous man, and I've always trusted her. Looking back, I can see the warning signs. She would pull her phone away when I walked in the door, and she would have coded conversations with her friends, but I was too busy and happy to notice to ask. Then came the pregnancy. Of course, we had discussed having children, but the timing had never felt quite right. When she told me she was expecting, my heart skipped a little. It felt like a puzzle was finally falling into place, and we were going to be a family from day one. She would add, "Look at them, David, they're just like you." I would squint at the hazy image. A proud smile on my face, eager to find the resemblance, and when he was born she said it again, "Oh David, he's the spitting image of you." Everyone agreed, our families, our friends, even the nurses, they all said over how our son little Jimmy had my eyes. I was blinded by the joy of it all, the love, the new responsibility, the sheer miracle of life. I'd stare at him for hours, memorizing every detail, searching for those familiar eyes, but a nagging feeling started to creep into my mind. It was a whisper at first, a tiny seed of doubt planted in the back of my mind. It had to do with the fact that as I spent more and more time with little Jimmy, those familiar eyes seemed not so familiar. They weren't my exact shade of hazel, they had a different quality to them, a darker, more intense hue. I dismissed it as just me being overly analytical, the pressure of being a new father. Then came the commercial. It was a local news spot for a DNA testing company. "Curious about your ancestry, find out your roots." I laughed it off when they choked, but the seed had already been sown, and I now find myself looking into genetic features and contrasting my eye color with the different options. To calm myself, I ordered a kit online, telling myself I had nearly forgotten about it. The kit sat on a shelf because the new baby's life was so overwhelming, collecting dust until the day I made the decision to do it. It was an easy procedure that only required a cheek swab, so I mailed it out and tried to forget about it, but I was unable to. The whisper had become a steady hum in the back of my mind. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was knee-deep in a project proposal at work. My phone buzzed. "Your DNA results are ready." My heart pounded against my chest as I clicked the link, half expecting to be inundated with confirmation of everything I thought I knew. The results loaded, and when I read the words exclusion, my blood ran cold. This person is not the biological father. I stared at the screen, feeling excluded and my world spinning. The phrase reverberated in my mind, and although I read the report over and over again, nothing changed. It was as though the floor had been torn out from beneath me. It was like a kick to the gut to realize that the tiny boy I adored as my own was not my kid. I needed to see her to make her explain that. I left work without telling anybody, got into my car, and sped home like a man possessed after the joy, love, and trust all vanished and were replaced by a cold, burning rage that made me sick and queasy and made it impossible for me to breathe. Naturally, Ruby was at home, clinging to Jimmy in his bassinet. When she looked up and spotted me, her face lit up. "I thought you had a big presentation today, so we need to talk." "What are you doing at home?" she asked, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "What is it, honey?" I said, my voice dangerously low, and her smile was faltered. I went to the counter and picked up the report, the thin paper crinkling in my shaking hand. "Explain this," I said, pushing the paper in front of her face. She looked at it, her eyes widening, her face losing color. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to play coy, Ruby," I growled. The rage rising to the surface. "You know very well what it is evidence that I am not Jimmy's father." Her eyes raced about the room as though they were looking for a way out. "There must be some error, David. These tests are unreliable," she replied, her voice quivering. "Because he has your eyes, everyone says, so his eyes aren't mine, Ruby, they never were." My voice cut through the air like a shard of glass as I said, "I don't want to hear your pathetic excuses. I want you out of my house, out of my life." She looked at me, her face a mask of disbelief, and she whispered, "We're a family, we're married, we were a family." I said, "They were a lead just like you. You lied to me from day one." She began to cry, tears streaming down her face, and I can explain. I told her to stop crying and turned to leave the room. I went straight into the office and printed out the legal separation documents that I had looked up the night before. I also printed a copy of the DNA report that highlighted the exclusion text. I put the stack of papers on the table in front of her, signed it and said, "What about Jimmy?" She was still crying and her hands were shaking as she reached for the pen. "Hugh, not my son, he's your burden, not mine," she said. It was a cruel thing to say, but at that moment, I felt no sympathy or compassion, just a deep burning rage. I signed the papers, tears streaming onto the page, and then I left without saying goodbye or turning around. The next few days were a blur. I moved into a small apartment. The silence of stark contrast to the chaos of my previous life. My lawyer dealt with the separation and divorce. The house was sold, the assets divided. I ensured that she had what she needed to take care of her son. I gave her more than was necessary because I knew that Jimmy wasn't to blame for her sins, and also, if I'm being honest, it made me feel somewhat less bitter. I didn't want her to fail. I wanted her to have everything she needed and fail all the same. I didn't reach out to her. I didn't want to see her face or hear her voice ever again. I threw away every photograph of us, every reminder of our life together. I was like someone who had woken up from a dream, finally seeing the world for what it really was. I finally saw the truth behind her smile, behind her eyes, behind the web of lies she had spun months past. I threw myself into my work. I spent my weekends hiking and exploring, seeking solace in the quiet solitude of nature. I was slowly, painstakingly rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. The pain was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was fading slowly but surely. Then one day I received a package in the mail. It was a small, beautifully wrapped box. I opened it curious and found a framed photo. It was a picture of Jimmy, a recent one. He was standing in a park, his hand gripping the hand of the man that was his real father. I didn't recognize the man. The photo was accompanied by a handwritten letter from Ruby. "I know you hate me," she wrote, "and I understand I deserve it, but I wanted you to see him. He's happy. He deserves to be happy. I hope you can find some peace too." I looked at the photo. Jimmy had grown. He looked like a normal, happy little boy. His eyes, they weren't mine, but they were full of life, of innocence. For the first time since I found out, I felt a different kind of pain, not rage but a deep sadness because of her falsehoods. I lost the little boy I had loved. I looked at the picture for a while, and on the back she wrote, "His name is Thomas." That one sentence was the last straw for me. It was never real, and I should never have trusted her. She didn't deserve my love or my sympathy. I made the decision to do what I should have done all along, taking the picture and the letter and putting them in the fireplace. Without hesitation, I struck a match, and as I watched it burn, a strange feeling of peace came over me. Even though I knew it would take a while for me to fully recover, I knew that my own chapter had finally come to an end and that I could begin a new one, free from the deceit and falsehoods of the past. She had received what she was due, and I also deserved to be set free. It was a minor triumph, but it was mine, and I knew right then that I would be okay. I watched it burn until the last speck of ash had gone to dust, and then I left my apartment and went about my life.